The revenge season gets a happy ending as the South Carolina Gamecocks are your women's college basketball national champions of 2024.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Line, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team both faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. The South Carolina Gamecocks got the long-awaited revenge that they were looking for in arguably the best way possible. They defeated the team that knocked them off in the Final Four last year in the Iowa Hawkeyes. South Carolina going 38-0 and getting a storybook ending to this season that they were wanting and getting it in a variety of different ways. So let's break each of those aspects down real quick. The first aspect that I want to bring up is Raven Johnson. We all know what happened last year. The viral clip that went out of Raven Johnson dribbling around the three-point line and Caitlin Clark giving her basically 8-10 feet of space and just waving her off saying, you go ahead and shoot that because we don't feel like you can make it. And Raven Johnson has made it abundantly clear the past couple of weeks how much that affected her, to the point where she has supposedly watched that game back over 100 times, to the point where she even contemplated quitting basketball altogether. And while, sure, if you just look at the box score for the national championship game, you might sit there and go, well, Raven didn't go off offensively in terms of shooting the ball, and Caitlin Clark got 30 points. You really find out, though, who the casuals are versus the people that actually know basketball. Because the people that just say, well, Caitlin scored 30 points, they don't understand what Raven Johnson did in this game. Raven Johnson was the difference maker defensively. She was the person that drew primarily the assignment of guarding Caitlin Clark. And it was the perfect defensive strategy employed by South Carolina, where Raven Johnson basically guarded Caitlin by opening up her left side and essentially inviting Caitlin Clark to drive to her right. When Caitlin Clark drives to her right, she's a lot less likely to take those circus-like three-point shots. She's more likely to put the ball on the floor, and she constantly managed to get her to drive baseline, kind of towards the corner, and it made Caitlin Clark really uncomfortable, and honestly, it took a lot out of Caitlin Clark. And when Raven Johnson was guarding Caitlin Clark specifically, Caitlin Clark shot 3 of 11 from the field, scoring only 7 points. And on top of all that, Caitlin Clark gave up the basketball 4 times when Raven Johnson was guarding her. One of those turnovers, by the way, was that momentum-changing steal that Raven Johnson got at the end of the first half. I truly felt like that when that play happened, the game changed for South Carolina. It got the team fired up. It was an exclamation mark on what was a great second quarter, storming back from what was a pretty large deficit at one point in the first quarter against Iowa, and basically sent the message that it ain't going to happen again, bucko. It ain't going to happen again. So, great game for Raven Johnson, basically expending almost all of her energy on defense so that Caitlin Clark would be limited in what she did. Kamilla Cardoso caps off her South Carolina career in John Elway fashion as a champion. Her final college game gets, I believe, 15 points and 17 rebounds. By the way, the 17 rebounds because, of course, it was a career high for Kamilla Cardoso. She was also named the NCAA tournament's most outstanding player. She joins Asia Wilson and Aaliyah Boston as the only Gamecocks to have ever accomplished this in the women's basketball program's history. We now need to talk about Kamilla Cardoso as one of the all-time greats that this program's ever seen in terms of dominant post players. And I kind of feel for Cardoso because she got her final season in a year where there were all these other players that the national media covered. And listen, I get why they gave all the coverage to Caitlin Clark, okay? I know it was probably annoying for a lot of Gamecock fans, but you can at least understand the reasoning behind it. But they also covered a lot of the freshmen. They covered Hannah Hidalgo from Notre Dame. They talked about Juju Watkins from Southern Cal. MiLaysia Fulwiley, quite frankly, got more national fanfare than Kamilla Cardoso did. And that's not totally fair in regards to what Cardoso meant to this team. She, at the end of the day, was the most important player on this team. If you have any doubts about that, just go back and watch the Final Four game against NC State when Cardoso went down with that injury, was hobbling around, eventually had to leave the game, at least at the end of the first half. And you could just see it on the looks of everybody's faces on South Carolina's side, like, oh no. Oh, this is not good. And not necessarily because of the injury, but because it was Kamilla Cardoso that got hurt. South Carolina needed Kamilla Cardoso. And sure, she might have not put up the gaudy numbers over a long period of time like an Asia Wilson or Aaliyah Boston did. And sure, she won't be the number one overall pick in the WNBA draft that takes place in just a few weeks' time. She won't be. But we also got to remember Cardoso waited her turn. She waited like 3 years to finally get this opportunity, and she took full advantage of it. And listen, Asia Wilson, Leah Boston, again, the two best players this program's ever had, right? Both national champions. Neither one went undefeated. Kamilla Cardoso did. So when we talk about the greatest players to have ever played in this program's history now, you've got to bring up Kamilla Cardoso in the same breath as Asia Wilson and Aaliyah Boston. One last thing, one last part of this storybook ending that I know gives Gamecock fans a lot of excitement. Tessa Johnson and MiLaysia Fulwiley. They did not play like freshmen in this national championship game. Tessa Johnson, y'all, I continue to be impressed with this true freshman. She doesn't play like a freshman. Her confidence is of someone that has played this game at the college level for 3-4 years. And she's just a freshman. She just finished her freshman season. She led the team with 19 points. Had multiple shots yesterday where she had a defender right in front of her, and Tessa basically just caught the ball and with full confidence just put it on up there, and it went right through the net. And we would not have seen that from Tessa Johnson at the start of the season. She might have been a bit more hesitant to take those kind of shots. Maybe thinking, I'm a freshman. I'm playing with a bunch of veterans on this team. You know, I'm going to get scorned for taking a shot. She doesn't have that fear anymore. And that's nightmarish when you consider the fact that she's going to be playing alongside MiLaysia Fulwiley in short time. Raven Johnson, Tahina Paopao are both coming back next year. It'll be the 4th year for Raven Johnson, the 5th year for Tahina Paopao. Then the year after that, we could see MiLaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson both take over the backcourt. And I'm telling y'all what, it's going to be fun to watch. With the ball handling ability and the athleticism and the ability to score all 3 levels from MiLaysia Fulwiley, and then Tessa Johnson being so savvy and crafty, having confidence, and having a fantastic outside shot, it's going to be one of the best backcourts in all women's college basketball when those two are in the starting lineup. You basically got a glimpse of the future on Sunday afternoon against Iowa. So, as a Gamecock fan, you got everything you wanted and more in this national championship win. South Carolina obviously winning, Raven Johnson getting revenge in some aspect against Caitlin Clark, Kamilla Cardoso going out a winner in dominating fashion, and you know what you're going to get now in a couple years with some of these young freshmen. And we'll talk about the young core South Carolina's going to have coming back next year and why they could be the start of a dynasty run. We'll talk about that later on in the show. But we've also got to talk about Dawn Staley here, because I just want to put it into full context we all need to enjoy what we're seeing with Dawn Staley right now. Because in my opinion, we're not going to ever see anything like this again in women's college basketball. And I'll explain my reasoning for why I think that in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team both faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals worldwide, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours when they use LinkedIn Jobs. So why not go ahead and join them? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions do apply. Welcome back to this Monday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen, wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, or your first watch on YouTube. Let's talk about Dawn Staley now. This national championship win elevates Dawn Staley's status as one of the all-time great coaches in women's college basketball history. Dawn Staley is now one of only 5 coaches in the history of the sport to have won 3 national titles or more. She is now one of only a handful of coaches that has ever gone undefeated throughout an entire season. I know Gina Auriemma has done it. I'm sure Pat Summitt has done it. I know Kim Mulkey's done it. And I think 1 or 2 other coaches from the earlier years of women's college basketball did it as well. So only about 5 or 6 have ever done it. Dawn Staley is now a part of that group. But I'm not necessarily going to talk about all of that, because we all know at this point, just from a pure resume standpoint, what Dawn Staley has done for the game of women's college basketball and for South Carolina's program as a whole. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that Dawn Staley, in my opinion, she is a part of a dying breed of coaches in the sport. And here's where I'm going with this. I look at Dawn Staley as being a part of the Gino Auriemma, Pat Summitt ilk, in the sense that Dawn was brazen enough to take over a program that, quite frankly, compared to what she had done up to that point in her career, she could have easily looked at it and said, there's no reason for me to come here. South Carolina, I mean, they weren't even a blip on the map before Dawn Staley got there. And obviously that's changed. But with Dawn Staley, the thing that is amazing is she not only made the decision to do that, but think about the way that she has built this program. First of all, Dawn Staley has been here, 15, 16 years now? She has not done this overnight. It took a long time for Dawn Staley to get to this point with this program. And the way that she has done it has been what is now viewed as through traditional methods in terms of building your program, which is we're going to recruit the high school ranks, we're going to bring a bunch of kids in, and we're going to develop them over a number of years to the point where they're going to be ready to take over in a certain role when their time comes. This is why I say Dawn Staley is a part of a dying breed of coaches, because, y'all, let's be honest, how many coaches are operating in that fashion now? How many are doing that? All these coaches going to the transfer portal. Look at Kim Mulkey. She is, again, purely from a resume standpoint, you have to give her flowers. She is one of the more accomplished coaches this sport has ever seen. And she's kind of like Dawn Staley in the sense that she was also accomplished as a player. So she has that cachet in terms of just pure accomplishments. And she just dove headfirst to the transfer portal this past offseason after winning a national title. Went out there, got Haley Van Lith from Louisville, got Anissa Morrow from DePaul. Look how that ended up for them, by the way. They didn't even make it back to the Final Four, even though they had the most star-studded lineup in terms of starters in the entire country, just on paper. But what Dawn Staley has done here, taking over a program that was not nationally known and building her program through going out there and recruiting, and yes, probably using what she has done to help get some of these kids to come here. She doesn't have to do that very much now. Now she can just point to all the rings and 38-0 and say, hey, you want to win? You want to win titles? Okay, cool. Come to Columbia. But doing it by recruiting these kids and developing them and, quite frankly, making them uncomfortable and saying, listen, you're not going to get everything you want when you come here. Okay? You're not. I'm going to tell you that from the jump. You're probably going to dislike me sometimes early on because you're not going to get the playing time that you want. You're going to go from being a McDonald's All-American and probably the best player potentially in your entire state that you came from to you're going to be getting rotational minutes in year one as long as you're putting in the work. And let's also just be honest, with NIL and the transfer portal, there's never been another time in collegiate sports history where that kind of mentality as a coach is de-incentivized. Okay? You're not incentivized to go about it in that manner. And if you're someone that maybe doesn't have the cachet of a Dawn Staley, you're probably a lot more concerned about, geez, this kid's not really ready, but if I don't play them a certain amount of games or minutes this year, they might walk out the door and transfer. And I don't even get them for more than 6 months. There are coaches that live in fear in that regard now. Dawn Staley doesn't. And this is why, in a way, I say that she's a part of a dying breed of coaches. Gino is built the same way. You see UConn going to the transfer portal now every offseason? No. Pat Summitt, she obviously, God rest her soul, was not alive long enough to coach into this era of the transfer portal and NIL. But I can imagine that if Pat Summitt was still with us and was at Tennessee, that she would not be operating in that fashion. Dawn Staley is of a similar ilk of those two coaches in the sense of how she runs her program, the expectations that she sets, and the fact that she's not just going to cater to these players. Now, again, this year, obviously, she says that she's changed as a coach in a good way because she has learned when to pick her battles, right? But my whole point with saying all this is Gamecock fans and really and truthfully women's college basketball fans, you need to enjoy this as much as you can. You should. And I'm not saying this like Dawn's going to retire. I don't see Dawn retiring for a good while. And when you're winning like this, why would you retire? Really. But we're not going to see this ever again. We're not. Because coaches, when Dawn Staley does eventually decide she's done, you'll see a plethora of different coaches winning national titles, and most of them probably be using the transfer portal to a significant degree. And yes, South Carolina used the transfer portal last season. I get it. They went out and got Tahina Paopao from Oregon. Okay, they got one player. And Tahina definitely meant a lot to this team this year. But for the most part, the players that contributed were players that Dawn brought in herself. We're never going to see something like that again. In terms of long-term sustained success, building a program through, again, quote-unquote, traditional methods. We're never going to see that again. So everyone should enjoy this ride that Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks are on while it lasts. And again, I think it's going to last for a good long while. I don't see it ending anytime soon. But my whole point here is it's special what Dawn Staley is doing and what she has done here at South Carolina. Now, South Carolina, fans have looked at UConn and Tennessee for a long time as far as programs that have gone on long dynastic-like runs, won multiple national championships. South Carolina has now won 2 of the last 3. I don't necessarily call it a dynasty yet. We could save that conversation for another day. But if South Carolina wins the national title next year, then yes, it is indeed a dynasty. But is this the beginning of maybe a 3-peat? Or heck, even a 4-peat? Looking at the roster, it's not too shabby of a concept. We'll discuss that in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. Looking at this team and what South Carolina is bringing back next year, again, as of right now, South Carolina is only losing Kamilla Cardoso at the 5 spot. Now, obviously, South Carolina, I believe they could lose Sakima Walker. Walker did not maybe make quite the impact that she thought she would have made this season. Didn't get a whole lot of minutes, so maybe she decides to move on. Maybe she decides she's done with basketball altogether. Who knows? Tahina Papa obviously is coming back for one more season. So you look at this roster, the scary thing for the rest of the sport is, pretty much everybody's coming back. It's like 2022 going to 2023 all over again. Because you got Tahina Papa returning. Raven Johnson's going to be back at the point guard spot. Bree Hall, more than likely, will be back at the wing spot. Sanaya Fagan, back. Chloe Kitts is back. Again, this is barring anything that happens in the transfer portal, and who knows? There could be one person that just decides they want to go elsewhere to get more playing time. If they do, you can understand why. But as far as I can tell, it seems like the majority of this team, it's going to be back next year. And so there's going to be a solid group of veterans on this team, players that have been in this program or have played college basketball for 4 or 5 years. And then you look at the younger core that this roster is going to have. And y'all, this is where I say, listen, this could be the beginning of a 3-peat or maybe even a 4-peat for South Carolina. Because you look at the younger players. You got MiLaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson, your backcourt. And again, as we all saw on Sunday, when those two finally get their chance, it's going to be dangerous for everybody else that plays South Carolina moving forward. That's not even considering the fact that you've got Joyce Edwards coming in, the National Gatorade Player of the Year, a co-MVP of the McDonald's All-America game, and somehow only the number 2 player in the country, according to ESPN's Hoop Girls rankings for the 2024 class. Based on the awards she's won, it seems like you can make a strong argument that Joyce Edwards is the best player in this class. She's joining next year as a true freshman, just for the heck of it. So, Ashlyn Watkins, assuming that maybe she starts at that 4 spot, Joyce Edwards is going to come in right behind her, and maybe Chloe Kitts, if Kitts stays at the 4. That, again, another conversation for a different time. But point is, they're going to have she could probably win 6th Woman of the Year in the SEC in year 1. I mean, Joyce Edwards, you could see the potential that she has. She's got it. She's going to be the next great front court player here at South Carolina. And then you've got, and y'all please forgive me, because I actually did not practice pronouncing her name before I started the show, and I definitely should have. Adele Tack. If I butcher the first name, I apologize. I promise you I will get it, and it will happen from this point forward. But Tack, she missed this entire season with a significant lower body injury. And I'll admit, was not completely on my radar, say, a few months ago. Saw that the Gamecocks obviously had brought her in. Seemed like a really good recruit based on the rankings. But I'm now very intrigued at the prospect of her being a part of this team moving forward because Dawn Staley recently, and I want to say it was during the first round or second round of the NCAA tournament when they were still in Columbia, she was eventually asked about her progress and, how her being able to watch the team this season has helped her, kind of integrate into the program and everything. And Dawn basically said that she is like another Leah Boston that is farther along at this point of her career. She didn't say that verbatim. I'm paraphrasing there. But that's in essence what she said. And to think that that could be the case, knowing what we saw happen with Aaliyah Boston the past few years, that is nightmarish. At this point, I'm running out of adjectives to describe how scary this group could be. So you mean to tell me you might have a Aaliyah Boston 2.0 on this team intact. You got Joyce Edwards coming into the program this offseason as a true freshman. And you got two true sophomores who are going to be WNBA players easily in MiLaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson, your backcourt. Y'all, I see another group that is going to be as successful as the Freshies, but maybe even more successful. Because, listen, for everything that the Freshies did, and I know the COVID season ended that one tournament, it basically, they basically canceled it because of the pandemic, but they did only win one national title. As successful as they were, and they were uber successful, took the program to new heights. And now this group is currently elevating it to a new level. Fulwiley, Johnson, Edwards, and Tack. Mark it down. They're the next Freshies here at South Carolina, even though they didn't all come here as a part of the same recruiting class, but they're going to have a similar kind of impact in the sense I think they're going to elevate the program even higher. So, it's only the beginning. I easily could see this team going back to back. And with that kind of talent, I can easily see this team maybe even winning 3 or 4 straight titles. Now, I understand you can't just assume that, okay? I know people are going to say that in the comment section on YouTube. I understand that. Y'all, who's going to take them down? I mean, LSU, listen, they could be the team, I guess, but they've got things to figure out. And let's be honest, Dawn Staley's got Kim Mulkey's number. She's got everybody's number right now. Gino at UConn. Tennessee, maybe this new coach of theirs, maybe she brings Tennessee back to the heights that they're used to seeing. But we have to wait and see on that. Notre Dame with Hannah Hidalgo, maybe. Juju Watkins at Southern Cal, I guess. But who else is doing what South Carolina's doing right now? And this is where South Carolina has separated themselves. They don't just bring in one great group and then fall off a cliff in terms of recruiting. They recruit consistently well every single year. So they've got juniors and seniors that are going to play in the WNBA. And then they got freshmen that come in and they're ready to play immediately. Who else is doing that? At the rate South Carolina is nobody. That's the answer. The answer is nobody. So get ready, buckle up, grab your popcorn, because this could be the beginning of the greatest run that this program has ever seen, and one of the greatest runs in women's college basketball history. This group has the potential to do that. So the rest of the sport, they better be prepared, because I don't see this ending anytime soon. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are y'all's thoughts on the storybook ending that this team got and all the different aspects that were a part of it? Raven Johnson, Kamilla Cardoso, what the true freshmen did. What are your thoughts on what this means for Dawn Staley, her current standing now amongst the all-time greats in women's college basketball history? And if maybe she is a part of a dying breed of coaches in the sense that we're not going to see this very much again once she's done. And lastly, what are your thoughts on what this team's bringing back for next year and the special run that they could go on with the young core that they are developing? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section if you watched today's show on YouTube, or you could shoot me a direct message on X at @A_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. As always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Monday and a fantastic start to the work week, and enjoy the heck out of this national title victory. I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.